Hi, I'm Yann. I lost count. I thought there was one more person. Or is there some? Okay, right. Yeah, okay. Well, hey, I'm Yann. I'm not Zoe. Well, anyway, if we were playing a game over 1,000 years ago in Central America, a game would be probably Patoli, and it would begin by the participants agreeing on the items to be gambled, and then evoking Xochipilli, the god of art, beauty, dance, flowers, song, homosexuals, male prostitutes, and games. Nowadays, the sounds of the setup of a board game are usually a little bit more restrained. This is a picture of one of my favorite games, Agricola. Usually one person reads out the rules and carefully distributes the tokens or the currency, finds the dice, assembles the board. Music will be playing in the background. You'll hear drinks and snacks. Maybe you've lost a few of the pieces. Instead of Xochipilli, the god of games, the invocation is now usually for Will Wheaton, the current god of board games, whose YouTube videos explaining rules and showing a game being played are massively, massively popular. Each one of his videos averages well over 1 million views. And every day people play board games and watch his videos for a little introduction of the rules, or maybe something of a rule refresher. The sound of board games is the sound of our own human history. You can kind of hear the sound of the Assyrian guards scratching out the top board game on a statue 3,000 years ago when they were board guarding the temple. And that scratching is a lineage that is played out over surfaces all the way down to today with Pachisi games in India being played on stone floors. And these materials that we use in the game inform the game and the sound together, forming a single integral experience with stone on stone and stone on wood and wood on plastic. Each combination sounds different. The Kazakh minority in Mongolia play a version of Mankala called Esen Korgol, where the game pieces are made out of goat droppings. This implies both the sound and also potentially you're hearing goats in the background as you play. This is equally true in modern game design. The individual sounds of Jenga blocks being stacked is a sort of narrative precursor to the inevitable collapse. You'll hear the sound of each block twice, once on its way up and once on its way down. The objects used to play on the board form their own sound identity, which can be traced back thousands of years. Complex dice, like this Roman-era 20-sided die, are ancient, and they represent both gambling and divination. The throwing of lots, for example, is mentioned 77 times in the Bible. It's not exactly sure what they meant by throwing of dots, but the materials used would have reflected their sociocultural setting. Modern dice, as a random number generators, come from China, and they took a number of forms. In Bruegel's children's play, you can see two different forms, the teetotum, the little girl, and also the throwing of goat knuckles by slightly older people in 1560. Dice evolved as materials evolved, turning into cards and boards. Rattling converted into shuffling. This transition happened at about the same time as manuscript rolls changed into paged books, with playing cards being some of the first examples of block printing. The sound of gameplay would have therefore changed in relation to the technological and cultural changes happening at the same time. But of course, cards did not replace dice. They came together, fusing into a new variety of games like snakes and ladders. Random number generators like dice were used to control movements. The library of sound involved in a board game expanded to include sliding, tapping, the movement of dice, and the movement of pieces. As board games developed further, they came to represent economic and industrial changes as well. The Landlord's game, designed by Elizabeth Maggie around 1900, was meant to show the advantages of a progressive tax system, and the different sounds thus came into play. Money, the sound of shuffling money, decisions, negotiations, and arguing. These social sounds are integral to games as well and provide a wonderful glimpse into the human side of history. This game, le Nouveau Jeu des Cris de Paris, for example, is an 18th century game where each spot is a different street crier. You can really imagine people playing this and landing on a spot and then recreating the sound of that street cry as they played it. The sound of the game can reflect the way it was used in society as well. This board game was found in a tomb, possibly belonging to a druid down in England. This game was set up as if it was in the middle of a game. I'm repeating myself there, but you can imagine that it was a quiet, contemplative game, perhaps like chess, which would suit the setting of being in a tomb. But social sounds are often playful, and games can take advantage of that with co-op gameplay. Pandemic is a popular board game which requires cooperation from everyone involved, generating discussions about strategy. It has a decidedly different sonic characteristic compared to competitive games. Some game objects were conceived originally in order to avoid these kinds of arguments. The sounds of many of the games that we play therefore reflect the origins of the games. The dice dome, for example, comes from dice cups, which were designed to help avoid manipulating dice rolls. So the fun sound that you would use in this game is directly correlated to the origin of dice as a gambling tool. Another example is yut sticks, most common in and around Korea, which perform similar functions to dice. When they're thrown or dropped, different values calculated based on how many fall face up or face down. And this is very similar to I Ching, which people still use today to try to glimpse the future. It's absolutely the same origin. Folk games like the amazingly named Jiha Wimmy have social history embedded in them as well. You rub the sides of the stick, and using a little hidden hand technique, it changes the direction of the propeller, either left or right, Ji or Ha. Ji and Ha were terms used for guiding your horse, and they came from 17th century Scots dialect. And so these names are embedded into the social history of the game. Modern games completely reflect our contemporary society as well. Hungry Hungry Hippos is cheap, loud, brash, pointless, plasticky, and loads of fun. It's kind of like our modern society. It's also totally random. It's just a random number generator. The settings that we play in provide other levels of sonic characteristics as well, the environmental. This changes the perceptions of the sounds we have. These people playing battleships on an actual warship draws a nice parallel with those guards that we saw earlier, scratching a board game in Assyria, but with a vastly different sound palette, which reflects the changing nature of modern warfare. Sound people have a real chip on their shoulder when it comes to the use of sound in games, but we really don't need to. Sounds are embedded into our socio-cultural history of play, with materials, methods, and environment all having sonic characteristics that reflect the gameplay, and those sounds contain a wealth of information with many, many layers of meaning and depth. Thank you.